Because the crisis is not just not caste, class, language specific, it is not age specific. In fact, it is affecting the most vulnerable of us all, which is our young people, children. The statistics are staggering. One student commits suicide every hour in India. Over the last 5 years, more than 40,000 students have committed suicide. We have to really let that play through in our minds. In 1 year, more than 8,492 children commit suicide. But numbers can often still remain a blind spot. And that's why today this session is so crucial, because we have some very courageous young people who've come to tell their stories, their journey, their struggle, and their capacity to cope, so that it really opens up our eyes and we begin to remember that this crisis is not just in our own homes, but maybe just at one remove with the people we love, we are friends with, and yet we are not discussing it. Before I invite them onto stage, we'd like to show you a short film which sets the context and brings home to us just how widespread this phenomenon is. So ladies and gentlemen, this session on teenage depression, a short film.
I didn't want to wake up in the morning. I didn't want another day to come, because if the day started, then I'd have to get those feelings back. Don't want to be you. Take anyone where you want to recreate. All my friends or people who I thought were my friends, they just looked at me and they just judged me. They laughed at me while I was taking my food during break. It just broke me. Everyone in my school is just this perfect human being. Every bit of your mind absolutely hates yourself.
So I'm 17 right now. A lot of my mental health problems started when I was 14. It started with a few months of an acute depressive phase, hopelessness, lack of appetite, things like that, which sort of segued a year later into a manic episode, which gave me my final, confident diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder.
I thought I had signs of anxiety or depression pretty much from the 8th grade. So I kind of just dismissed it in my head, and then in the 9th grade I started therapy.
Since I was 11 years old, grade 6, one of my best friends, I had a huge fight with her. Just like empty but heavy. When I'm doing something, I can't concentrate on things exactly. I'm absolutely exhausted. But even sleep won't help with this kind of exhaustion.
What happened was, when I was in 9th grade, I went through a lot of interpersonal troubles with some people, a lot of bullying and things like that.
In the 11th grade, we went for a trip, and on the first night, I started having like a really weird, kind of hallucinating kind of thing.
It was friendships. There was a large falling out. And it was a sense of intentional isolation, ostracizing really.
So I started wondering what was wrong with me. That's why I started putting up newspapers in the mirror, because I didn't want to look at myself.
I dissociated for around a week after that. Essentially, you kind of lose control over what you're doing and saying.
I internalized a lot of the emotion I was feeling, right? Which ultimately led to, unhealthy coping mechanisms.
I was moving schools. My parents had been separated for most of my life, and my father had moved back a year before that. And 8th grade was also the first time we ever had exams.
All of this happened simultaneously while my midterm exams for class 9 were happening. My grandfather had just passed away, and my brother was going to college. It was 2017, either March or April, I'm not entirely sure. It was it was a suicide attempt. It was an overdose on my prescription medication.
I have had suicidal thoughts. I've gone a little bit. I haven't gone the entire way, but I've tried it. I live on the 28th floor, so there's always the urge to jump.
I was just about 15. I was a month away from 15. Basically, my parents found me.
When I told people about what was going on, I thought that they would understand. But they didn't. Instead, they just thought that I was an attention seeker.
People see it as a trend or a fad or something that we're all just bandwagoning. People aren't willing to take it seriously, which I think is probably the most toxic part.
I just wanted people to look at me and feel sad for me. I don't want people to feel sad for me. I feel sad for myself. That's enough. I just wanted someone to understand.
I've always had self-image issues, but that's because I've been overweight all my life. I'm sure it had some role to play in what happened to me and my mental health.
Every time like a girl posted something on Instagram, and I'd go back to class and all the guys would be talking about it. They're like, she's so pretty. That made me feel really bad about myself because I wanted to be like those girls. I just did not want to be like me.
So I think maybe in the 3rd grade, even I was doing these like crazy fad diets. I kind of compensated for it through other characteristics, like I bolstered my personality or my talent, kind of branded myself differently. I hope that I find peace with it one day. I just don't think yet, but I'm getting that.
People should educate themselves on what these disorders look like.
Don't dismiss what you feel.
First of all, trust in treatment.
It is not a phase. It isn't a trend. It isn't a fad.
Second of all, learn about it yourself, right? Read about other people who've gone through things and are doing fine now, because that really helps to allay that sort of hopelessness.
We're not enjoying this. We're not capitalizing on it to be edgy or get popular. It's something that's very real, and it's something that we don't have much control over, but we're trying to figure it out.
As I said, we wanted to establish that landscape of struggle, which is beyond the statistics, and that's why, with great pride, I'd like to invite on stage Ambud Sen Patra, who's 20. He's a student of psychology at Ambedkar University. He's a young man who's willing to speak about the fact that he has tried to commit suicide and that he has been self-harming since the age of 11, and why that has happened to him despite being as he says, the extrovert on steroids that he is. I'd like to invite Arsha Gaur on stage, 15 years old. Again, a super achiever. She's an MUN debater. She was head girl of her school when she was in class 5. And this is the most astonishing fact. She was playing national level soccer. When she was 12 years old, she was playing the under-19 team. And yet she's been struggling with self-esteem and with depression. And I'd like to invite Shailja Sen, one of the most reputed child psychologists and family therapists in our country, someone who's written many books. She's written Reclaim Your Life. She's talked about how love is the only way, and Imagine, No Child Left Invisible. Thank you very, very much for being here. Once again, thank you. Ambujad, I'd like to start with you. I'm going to quickly describe like a CV, the external factors of your story, because what we really want to probe is the more internal landscape that led to that. So as I said, you're someone who's a psychology student, you're a slam poet, and yet you tried to commit suicide. You're a high achiever, you've been getting 95%, but you've been self-harming since you were the age of 11, and you were diagnosed with ADHD when you were about 4 years old. So would you help the audience understand what was the trigger incident when you were 11 that began to make all of your anxiety manifest itself like this?
This what? Oh, yeah, hi. Wow, there are so many people. So I started self-harming at age 11. The trigger was academics. And I think that has been a big part of the triggers throughout the years, throughout the worst phases of my life. Being a high-achieving student, when you've had over 95% of a grade throughout your life, even a 90% seems like too much of a drop. when the entire world is telling you can do better, you can do better, you can do better. And suddenly you feel like, I don't want to do better, I want to try out other things in life. And when there is that sudden drop in marks, you feel like the world is closing in around you, everything is coming to an end. So it mainly began as an outlet for that. It exacerbated. I was in military school for 2 years. I was age 13 to around 15. I was there, and there the ADHD got better of me, because I already have an issue organizing things, and their organization is a big deal in any military institution. So yeah, left, right and center, a lot of punishments for my batch were the fault of mine. And that's where I think the first mega negative spiral in my life happened. Then after that, again, academic pressures. And I think that's actually a problem with anyone who has a mental illness and yet can be a high achiever. Because people who have severe enough mental illnesses that their daily life comes to a standstill, they become dysfunctional, they're already suffering enough. Those who do not have that severe of an issue, when they're not given the support, when they're not given the accommodations, when the system is structured in a way that's against them, they already begin to suffer just as much as the former described group.
So Ambuj, I'll come back to you, because you described your experience in military school, and you said one of the pressures was that there was so much of mandated punishment, that any little slip on your part, your friends and your entire your batch was being punished for things that you were doing. So that was one pressure. And this idea of control, when things are going out of control, what you do. But before that, Arsha, I want to bring you in. As I described again, that you've been a high achiever all your life, as much as it's possible for a young person to be. And yet you stopped eating and completely, you were anorexic to a point where at one point you dropped to 29 kilos, you passed out in school, you were hospitalized. Again, will you share with us what was your trigger episode? Why in what would look to everyone as a very successful life, why did you feel such helplessness?
I think in the Indian culture, a lot of love is expressed through food. So I grew up as a child, loving all these Indian sweets, gulab jamun, rasgulla, puri aloo, all the things that I think all of us really love. And I would say a healthy child, a little on the plump side. So I had, doctors telling me that, she's growing fine, but she could do with a kilo or two less. So that was always there. And as you mentioned, I did play football at a really young age. I was playing under 19 when I was 12 years old. So there's a lot of exposure when you're going out with people and you're playing with girls who are 19 years old, and you're seeing these girls who have boyfriends, and you're at this age where your hormones are jumping, and you also want to have boyfriends. You want to be popular, you want to have that physique that really entices everyone else. So I would see them eating quite a useless, you could say a negligible amount of lunch, and would eat a lot of junk food. But what I picked on was that they're not eating lunch, but they're still being able to play. So why can't I do that? Why, if they can look the way they are, I can also be like that. And therefore I wanted to look like them, and I stopped eating.
But, and Arsha, I'll draw you in very quickly, but just to explore that a little bit more, Arsha, you've spoken about that being one trigger about why you stopped eating. But there was more in your life, and there was a particular episode which really tipped you over the edge into acute depression, was when you went to camp. And, I think one of the things we want to explore is just what your peer environment and friendships, what is that landscape of vulnerability that we don't even recognize? Would you share that episode?
So I think friendship has to be mutual. Only then can it be called friendship. Otherwise it's not friendship. It's just unilateral, and that way friendship does not exist. So I think when you have friends who go as long as 8-9 years long back with you, then you have certain expectations. You decide certain trusts in them, and when that trust is sort of betrayed, when you feel let down, then it's you feel terrible. And when it's when you're let down by a group of people, it's 3 or 4 times the letdown that you feel. And when too many things happen all of a sudden, for me, it was me going for football, it was me going for camp. So depression and anorexia started for me at the same time, due to which its impact was so much.
So again, I'll come back to both of you. Shalja, I'd love to draw you in here that, Arsha hasn't spoken about that specificity of her incident, but, we heard Vanaj, we heard Anushka, that for each person, the tipping incident is different. Vanaj also spoke about friends and ostracization. With Arsha, it was that she was on a camp and her best friends, she asked for her medicine and her chewing gum not to be taken away from her. And when she woke up, she found her friends had really pillaged through her school bag. And somehow that felt a big act of betrayal for her. Someone outside listening to this might think, what's the big deal? That's so trivial. And why should it affect young people so strongly? So would you help us understand what is this landscape and how do small incidents affect? So beyond the immediate circumstance, what is this landscape we are discussing where young people are feeling so despairing?
I think here Arsha's brought up something really crucial we need to understand. And I think the 3 stories that you showed before we came on stage highlighted that very well. If you see, the common factor everywhere is a sense of loneliness, a sense of disconnection, a sense of not being accepted, of being judged, of not being part of this mainstream, of not being somewhere on the outside, on the periphery. And every young person I have worked with, and I've been in this profession for 30 years, right? So I've seen the landscape change. Core theme always has been a sense of loneliness, a sense of disconnection. And this generation is the most connected generation in every way, the social media, WhatsApp. But the sense of disconnection in this generation, in fact, not just children, even for us adults, the sense of loneliness and disconnection is the highest. And so that is at the surface. However, if you ask a typical person, why do you think young people are going through depression or anxiety, and the numbers you talked about? In India, suicide is a leading cause of death. It tops the world in teenage suicide. 1 in 4 person or young person is diagnosed with depression or anxiety. That's huge. These numbers are staggering, but also they don't show the suffering the young people. When you see these numbers, they think it's happening out there, somebody else. We know that it's happening in our homes, it's happening in our schools. I'm sure in this audience, everybody will know one person, adult or child, who has gone through depression or anxiety. So it's very much real, but we don't want to look at it. We don't want to look at it, we want to blame. Typically people will say, oh, actually young people nowadays, because it's the video gaming. It's the social media addiction, or it is because they're so obsessed with their looks, or it is, one parent told me, this is all because of Tinder. If she had not been on Tinder app, she would have never been depressed. Or it's about, typically they are blamed, they are attention seeking, they are weak, they are fragile. And that's the important thing, is to underline what is happening, the sense of loneliness, a sense that typically young people, and I'm sure Ambuj will definitely talk about this, is a sense of lack of purpose, lack of meaning. What am I doing here? Young people will ask me, what am I doing here? What is this all about? What are you doing here? Why do you do what you do? And it's a sense of huge amount of pressure they have to go through. The pressure in terms of the academics, the pressure to be perfect, like Anushka in the movie. We want perfect children. We want perfect children, and if they don't come up to that level, the bar we have set for them, then they are defective. We are embarrassed, we are ashamed, we judge them. So the problem is not them. The problem is not them. Some children can cope with it, some children can't. They fight it, we label them aggressive, violent, or they withdraw, like Vanaj talked about, internalizing that. And the vulnerable, I'm talking this because I feel very strongly about it. The most vulnerable are the children who have disability, who have neurodevelopmental difficulty, who have different sexual orientation, who have a different gender expression, who in the social hierarchy are very low. But we don't want to look at that. There's so much of shame and stigma and silence around that.
So I'll come back to some of those themes you've raised, Shelja, but it's a good point to, again bring you in, Ambush, which is that when I chatted with you earlier, when one looks at what you're doing online, again, there's this disjunction because all the outward trappings of success are there. But when you went to military school, yes, that discipline, all of that made you feel extremely inadequate. But your reaction was to start harming yourself, and you've been slashing yourself and hurting yourself, now going on to almost from the time of 11 to 20. Can you explain the psychology of that? For most people, it would be very incomprehensible. Shelja spoke about this loss of control. Why would cutting yourself make you feel better? Why is it your coping mechanism?
All right, so there are two different aspects to this. Number one, a symptom of ADHD is impulsivity. So a detailed thought of what the consequences of an action can be. You may understand it cognitively, but emotionally comprehending what this action can lead to does not exactly function properly. There are actually three things. The second thing is, I did not like myself enough to actually care for my body at that point because of a lot of things. Technically, if you look at it from outside, I was still a high achiever in military school. I was a swimming gold medalist, and I was even an inter-school debater. But when there is a lot of pressure on you to keep performing, and that pressure was objectively existent in military school, because if you don't perform, you're punished, then what you feel like is that you're losing control of various aspects of your life. Like studies are going down the drain, marks are falling, your friendships are falling apart because people keep getting punished because of you. Your clothes are already a mess because somehow you never have time to organize them. And then you just want to do something that makes you feel in control. And pain is a very objective and intense emotion. And if you are able to cause yourself pain and feel like, yes, this I'm in control of. And I think that is the tipping point when a person feels like they're not in control. When they express that urge, it means that it's going in the direction of self-harm. And stopping it there is actually quite easy. Like most people, when they feel the urge to self-harm, they just need someone to talk to. If you hear them out, the first thing to do in even suicide intervention training, they say that the first thing to do when a person is at the edge of a psychological breakdown is delay it. If you delay it, you often avoid it. And even if you can't avoid it, then they at least know they have the security that they have someone to talk to.
So Ambush, the other thing you've spoken of and you shared with me was that for you, self-harm or cutting yourself, you could imagine is almost equivalent to addiction, to drug addiction. Can you help us understand that? Why would, at least drug addiction has pleasure. Hurting yourself can't be pleasurable.
Again, pleasure is so subjective. It's not a very objective term. Even drug addiction is painful. Like sticking yourself with a needle cannot be pleasurable. But the adrenaline rush is a factor, yes. But the after effect of the cutting is always a feeling of resignation, and resignation is still better than the anxiety that comes before. And it's like choosing between two evils, devil and the deep blue sea situation. And so after cutting, you always seek that relief. Even drug addicts don't seek the pleasure. People who have crossed into alcoholic territory, they don't seek the pleasure anymore. They just want a relief from the pain, from the stress they're going through.
So I'll come back to a bit of that. Arsha, when we were looking at the younger children earlier, as well as your stories, each one is like a personal landscape, of what makes you feel so helpless and hopeless. In your case, you spoke about this external factor about good looks, being with women who were getting boyfriends, young girls, and then this episode with your friends. But having gone through therapy, have you begun to understand deeper reasons, things from your childhood? Were there other things that people can't know about, which was creating this pressure cooker situation within you?
Yes, definitely. I think talking, like Ambuj said, really helps you understand that it's not one incident, but it's a series of incidents which probably start much before, but you keep on bottling them up, and then it becomes like a baking soda volcano, it just erupts. So for me, I realized through therapy, it was a lot about me not being included since childhood, probably friend groups or even in families. I used to see that, like, in wedding functions, that there would be a group of cousins, but I would always be left behind. Their cousins, having fun, and there are these little groups of children playing in school, and you're never included. And it's always the feeling of, why me? What is it in me that I can't be included? I want to be like them. I want to, be in this kitty party and have fun. It's always the question, why me? And then, like Ambuj said, you seek to escape. This escapism comes from something that others might see as, harming, like self-harm. For me, it was not eating. Starving is obviously not easy to do. B, it is not pleasurable. But it's the only thing that makes you feel good about yourself, is that you're successful in being able to cause harm in yourself, which is what makes you feel good about yourself.
Shelja, you spoke about parents. I want to come into that very quickly, Arsha, because we're going to run out of time before we've even explored anything. Is that when you were a very young child, when you were in class 2, there was an episode again which people may not be comfortable talking about, but it's important to open it up. Done to you again by a friend. Would you be comfortable speaking about it?
Yes, definitely. So I think a lot of us don't have a conception, especially young kids, about good touch and bad touch. And I think that's something that should be taught to children along with mental health since the very beginning in ways that are understandable to them. In class 2, I was subjected to physical abuse by this girl. I had just transferred schools, and you want to be friends with everyone. You want to make new friends in a new school. And the only way she would let me be friends with her was if I would let her feel me. If I would let her feel my breasts, and if I would let her feel other parts of my body. And that made me feel very insecure about myself. And till date, I'm not comfortable with people touching me too much. And that's also about that also led to one thing of me being very insecure about my body image.
So, again, if you have time, I want to come back to some of those themes. Shelja, could you speak about just the parent-child, in all the cases that you've dealt with? They've spoken about academic pressure, and that's something people recognize. But they're also talking about friendships being the source of stress.
Yeah.
And the third big pole in any child's life is the parent-child relationship. Yeah. Is that a common theme, and what about it is problematic? What is the breakdown between parents and children today?
As a family therapist, or in fact, I would say understanding the system is extremely important. Parents, when children are going through difficult times, it's very difficult for parents to understand the suffering the children are going through. Because if my child comes back from school and says, I don't have friends, or I'm lonely, or I'm feeling depressed, or whatever the issue might be, or I'm cutting, I see that as a reflection of my failure as a parent, as a mother. And for me, it's very easy to dismiss it and say, no, you're absolutely fine, or blame the child, right? So in that sense, parents find it difficult to accept the suffering or the hardship the child is going through. And many times, the problem is not just the parent and the child, it's actually the problems, the mental health problems represent social issues. They're not individual or family issues. Young people nowadays are, like I say, they are canaries of our times. Olden times, the mines, they would send canaries down to check the oxygen level. They are the ones who are showing the suicide level is so high. You can't just say because of them, or because of certain families, or because of certain parents. It's a social thing. It's a social issue, and it's very important that we are discussing this in a national forum like this. We need to have more conversations and discussions around this. Now, having said that, there are 3 Ds I talk about, which many times parents and teachers end up doing when children have mental health problems. The first is defining them. They start defining child, oh, this child has depression, this child has anorexia, this child has panic attacks. And we have to understand these labels are meaningless. They are the cover of the same book, same story. The person might have addiction, might have eating disorder, anxiety, depression. Underlying that is the suffering of the person. And that's very important, that we don't start defining the person by that single story. Second is dismissing. Of course, you're just doing attention seeking. It's just drama. You can snap out of it. And third is dumping. Dumping is any problem the child might be going through, a social problem, the school problems, family problem, we just dump it on the child, it's because of depression. So it's very important that we need to educate ourselves, like Vanaj was talking about it, what is mental health, what are the mental health problems? And as a society, what do we need to do? Right?
So Ambuj, let me quickly ask you that if we've talked about that landscape of struggle, but if today there are a lot of young people who are going to be watching this, from your own experience, what is the thing you would love to tell other young people? What is the takeaway from your own journey?
My biggest takeaway is it's a relic of the Industrial Revolution that tells you that objective success equals personal fulfillment. That is not true at all. You can be personally fulfilled even if you're not insanely successful in any field, and you can feel dismal, you can feel the absolute pits of sadness even if you're exceptionally successful, and that is okay. And seeking help is obviously necessary. No matter how bad things get, there is always someone out there to help you. These are the 2 things.
And so do you feel more in control now? You attempted to commit suicide very recently, but have you been able to pull yourself together, and are you feeling more in control of your life?
I do feel a lot in control, and obviously that all that credit doesn't go to me. A lot of it goes to Dr. Amit Sen, who is Dr. Shelja's husband and also my psychiatrist. And a major part of it goes to my parents, because that has been an unflinching support system, and I think that creates a safe space that a child can always go back to. And so now I feel a lot better.
Arshia, similarly, from having gone down 29 kilos, being hospitalized, today you're off medication, you're on your way to complete recovery. What was it that helped you? What did therapy do for you that it could do to a lot of other young people?
I think it showed me from the people who don't think I'm so valuable, there are 10 times the amount of people who love me. So I would rather look at the glass half full than see it half empty, and choose, the things that, find little things that make me happy rather than look at the things that make me sad. And obviously all the credit, like Ambuj said, goes to Dr. Sen and my parents, and most of all my school teachers. They've been an immense support in this journey. So I would just encourage all people to just look at the glass half full. Look at it half full and you'll be satisfied.
Shelja, if there's just one quick takeaway that you would want, not just parents or kids, but an entire society, what would be that one thing?
I think we have to say that, and particularly to young people, I'd like to say that do not let a single problem define you. There are multiple stories to you. Don't let a single problem define you. And you have a journey of hardships, but you have a huge sense of hope that Arshia and Ambuj bring to us, and find your audience. Both of them have an amazing audience in open mics, whatever gives you a sense of purpose. One thing that I have found which changes people's lives is when they get a sense of agency, when they get a sense of, this is what I want to do in life. It could be filming. Don't let adults decide for you. They really don't know. They can't fix you, really. You need to be subversive. You need to question. Don't let them, like I think the tattoo on your hand says, What does it say? Raise a glass to freedom. Exactly what I mean.
Raise a glass to freedom.
To freedom. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very, very much, all three of you. It's really, really courageous, of both of you particularly, but also really like to thank their parents and the entire support structure around them, which has enabled them to step out and to speak. That's a standing ovation for you. I just wanted to re-emphasize one aspect that they've all spoken about, including the children on screen, is that all of them needed a space to speak. That sense of a pressure cooker and helplessness goes out of it when you find somebody who will take your emotions seriously and just give you a chance to speak and be respected, and that itself is half the battle won. So this platform is very important in India today, is creating that space for people to speak up, and thank you for making that possible. Before I invite Neerja on stage,
Yes, thank you very much, Ambuj and Arshia, for being so incredibly brave. Thank you, Dr. Sen.